The United States and Israel are going back to war with Iran, and multiple mainstream Western media outlets are now confirming this fact. The Washington Post warns that Israeli airstrikes could be imminent, and the national interest, which leans more on the GOP side, just revealed that the U.S. has deployed 12 KC-135 Stratotankers to Qatar, the same aircraft used to support long-range bombing missions like the one we saw during the 12-day war between the U.S. and Israel against Iran. These developments suggest a major and dangerous escalation is currently underway. Of course, Israel always talks about escalation and has since the beginning, the middle, and the end of the 12-day war been threatening Iran with more strikes. He went in front of the UN General Assembly where over 50 delegates walked out on him, saying that Iran must not be able to rebuild its nuclear capabilities, that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium must be eliminated altogether, the same rhetoric that sparked the first iteration of the war in the first place. And Netanyahu has vowed since the end of the so-called US-brokered 12-day war ceasefire that we have no intention of taking our foot off the pedal. And if we see the actions of Israel right now, striking Syria, striking Lebanon, striking Gaza in its genocide, we know that Israel, when it makes these threats, it does plan to make good on them, no matter how catastrophic it may be for itself. Now, in the Washington Post, there was a U.S. analyst, Afshan Ostovar, who described Israel's mentality in this way, that Israel feels it may need to mow the grass or mow the lawn in Iran. That means striking facilities whenever they appear, supposedly, and keeping Iran permanently set back. Here's the thing. Mowing the grass is what Israel has been doing to Palestine. It's how Israeli officials have talked about Palestine for decades. 2014 Operation Protective Edge, these kind of operations were seen as mowing the grass, and now Israel wants to extend that to Iran and really to the entire region, because we see that with Lebanon and now we see it in Syria. We've seen it for years in Syria. Earlier in September, Israel attacked Hamas officials in Doha, Qatar. It has continued bombing Lebanon. Every strike has expanded the conflict in West Asia and has destabilized the situation to the point where we can only surmise that the United States and Israel have had this as the objective from the very beginning. Now let's turn to what the United States has done with this tanker deployment. This happened on October 1st. The National Interest reported that Washington sent 12 KC-135 Stratotankers tracked leaving the United States, stopping in England, and then arriving at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. One note about the Al Udeid Air Base: Iran struck this at the end of the 12-day war, and now Qatar has security guarantees. The Trump administration literally put in security guarantees, NATO-like security guarantees, for Qatar as it was sending these tankers, saying that any attack on Qatar is an attack on the United States. Now you could say that's because Israel attacked Qatar, and this is true. But the security guarantees are no doubt about Iran, that if Iran takes actions against this base again, that the United States will go to war. It's setting up a pretext. The United States doesn't care what Israel does. If it did, it wouldn't be supplying and supporting it like it has from the very beginning. Now, the last time this many tankers were deployed to the region was just before Operation Midnight Hammer, when the U.S. bombed Iranian nuclear facilities in June. And now the same surge happened again before this in 2019, right before the United States struck Iraq. And we know what happened then, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the high-ranking Iranian general that nearly led to a World War III situation. So this is an offensive operation. This timing is political. It is happening just after Donald Trump met with Netanyahu in the White House, and right after Secretary of War Pete Hegseth unveiled this Wario Ethos program at Quantico, the Marine Corps base there.
Truth. To ensure peace, we must prepare for war. From this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: warfighting, preparing for war and preparing to win.
This is not about defense at all, and Pete Hegseth was very clear about this. This is about war, and the United States is definitely preparing for it against Iran. Now, the danger of this extends far beyond whatever Iran could do to strike back against U.S. and Israeli forces, especially Israel, as we saw during the 12-day war, the massive destruction that its ballistic missiles caused in cities like Tel Aviv. The Washington Post is noting very explicitly that the Gulf states, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, are not only speckled U.S. bases, but anonymous officials in these countries are very, very concerned. Because, why? They're all vulnerable. Iranian ballistic missiles could easily hit a number of these bases, and it demonstrated this, hitting a communications site at the end of the 12-day war. A senior Arab official who did not want to be named and did not claim any particular country said to the Washington Post, "The region today cannot go through the same Iran-Israel war or any of the other wars that have been occurring over the last 2 years. The cost is far too high." Yet, what we are seeing is that another war could destabilize the region in the way that the Iraq War of 2003 ended up doing. But Washington, of course, refuses to de-escalate. Instability serves U.S. interests. It justifies weapons sales. It keeps the so-called allies dependent on Washington. And it keeps Washington in control of the political future of West Asia. For ordinary people, of course, war means devastations. Bombings of homes, collapsed economies, and generations robbed not only of peace, but also of their livelihoods and their lives themselves. Just look at the genocide in Gaza. Look at what happened to Iraq and what continues to happen all across the region from Lebanon to Syria. It is an absolute disaster, and things are only going to get worse when this war finally pops off. Now let's talk about sanctions, because sanctions have laid the groundwork for this entire escalation. The Washington Post explains that the Trump administration has reimposed these snapback sanctions, some of the harshest in world history. The Iranian currency is supposedly collapsing and inflation is spiking. All of this is purposeful. It's meant to starve the Iranian people into opposition to their government. But Iran has experienced this before, and sanctions have yet to collapse the economy. In fact, after the 12-day war, it was noted by many experts, including friend of the show, Professor Mohammad Randi, that Iran and Iranians have actually united now more than ever, and this is including against the U.S.-backed sanctions. So the United States, though, has set an ultimatum that is very reminiscent of the 12-day war igniting. So Iran is being told that it has to negotiate with the U.S. Specifically indirectly, that it needs to drop all nuclear production. It needs to stop its support for allies in the region, and it needs to also stop developing missiles. And in a sense, it needs to capitulate to the United States. And these talks have collapsed completely. There is no motivation to engage in them on the Iranian side. Iran's parliament has even threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty altogether, a move many could say, and perhaps many would want to see, a development thereafter of nuclear weapons. Now, Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, told the United Nations that there is, quote, a wall of distrust between us and the Americans that is quite thick and quite tall, end quote. And back in Iran, as the currency began to destabilize, Pezeshkian told local leaders that Iran will never surrender to pressure. Now, experts are warning that sanctions actually don't reduce conflict. They increase it. They are economic warfare that makes open war more likely. That's what we've been saying on this channel from the very beginning. That's what we have been seeing everywhere across the world. Now the Trump administration is looking toward Venezuela to do the same thing. Remember, Trump escalated sanctions against Venezuela and now is looking to overthrow the government there under the pretext of hitting and bombing drug cartels. So why is the United States and Israel continuing to push war against Iran? Well, for Washington, the reasons are very clear. It's about global dominance. It's about protecting and preserving and expanding the unipolar world. It's about controlling oil and trade routes. Remember, Iran is a key cog in the Belt and Road Initiative that China leads, and that much of Iran's oil actually goes to China. It's about strategic leverage, of course, against China to cut off China and Russia from one of its closest allies in the region. And it's also a way, of course, to distract people in the United States from the crises that they are facing at home. And of course, this is a lot about Israel. It's about its military supremacy in the region. It's about getting rid of all independent, quote-unquote, threats to its own expansionist ambitions. Together, the United States and Israel demonize Iran to justify policies that weaken, isolate, and punish it. But of course, history tells a different story about who the real problem is in the region. Of course, we know about the CIA coup in 1953 that overthrew the Iranian president, Mohammad Mossadegh. We know about what happened to Iraq from 2003 onward, to Libya and Syria from 2011 onward, and the genocide in Gaza. Today, it is Washington, it is Tel Aviv that is destabilizing the region, not Iran. Now, the bottom line is this. Washington is showing the world how sanctions are being used as a weapon to not only crush Iran's economy, which it has failed at, mind you, but also to expand back into a massive war against Iran in really the entire multipolar world. The U.S. deployment of these aircraft needed for another round of bombing, these tankers, is another signal that war could be, and very well is, imminent. Israel will always talk and always threaten strikes because Israel needs the destruction of Iran in order to achieve greater Israel and in order to ensure that the resistance loses. Now, this is not going to happen. Why? Because the Israeli project, the American project of empire, is outmoded. Even if Iran is sent into a spiral of destruction, it is no doubt going to unite the Iranian people more so around a program, not only of multipolarity, but of even more staunch independence. We know that during the 12-day war, we saw the images in the streets. We saw all across the region people cheering about the missile strikes that were going across thousands of kilometers in order to hit Tel Aviv. This is a moment in history where Israel and the United States find themselves more isolated than ever. The evidence of escalation is all there, but that escalation isn't a sign of strength. It is a sign of massive and growing desperation. The imagery of Netanyahu being walked out on by dozens upon dozens of delegates at the UN General Assembly is a testament to this fact. The United States is trying to manufacture consent for war against Iran, and Iran isn't even the only target. The Trump administration claimed it was going to be a peace presidency, but now we see multiple fronts where war actually is imminent. We have Iran, where the military escalation, the buildup to war is there. And we know that there are now anonymous Arab officials, Arab monarchy and Gulf country officials, that are saying that this could happen at any moment. That is not even the end of it. Venezuela is now coming under fire. Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, has just said that they have spotted, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry has spotted U.S. fighter jets flying just 75 miles off the coast of Venezuela. And any closer, it would mean the United States would be violating Venezuelan airspace. It's obviously a threat to Venezuela that these strikes that the U.S. is threatening against Iran could happen to Venezuela at any moment as well. And of course, the war in Ukraine is exploding still. Trump has just approved long-range strikes against Russia via Ukraine. Even if the weapons aren't there, even if the U.S. and NATO position is declining, it doesn't mean that the United States and NATO won't continue to pursue even more dangerous policies. There's even talks of Tomahawk missiles, every kind of wonder weapon in the books for Ukraine so that it can get closer and closer to hitting Moscow, to even maybe carrying out a decapitation strike on its own. This is fantasy, of course, because Russian air defenses are incredibly powerful, but this is ultimately the objective. The objective isn't to pull back on empire. The objective is to move forward on empire. And I think this is a huge lesson in history right now, that sanctions, the sanctions against Iran, are really just a tool for war for the U.S. empire and, of course, its primary attack dog, the Israeli regime. China and Russia are watching this very carefully. Of course, Russia is steadfast in its war now, its direct war that it has claimed it is fighting against, with all intents and purposes, a very accurate assessment that it is fighting a war with NATO, and that will continue. China has been threatened over and over and over again with war maneuvers for years and years now. But its military parade during the 80th anniversary of victory against Japanese aggression sent shockwaves across U.S. military halls. Why? Because China's military apparatus, its advanced hypersonic missiles, its nuclear capabilities are all powerful enough, even maybe more powerful than Russia and other countries in staving off any kind of military threat. So this is why the United States has to wage a hybrid war. It has to go after what it sees first as weaker links. The Trump administration made this shift very clear. He pandered to peace in Ukraine because Ukraine is a lost war. Of course, that war continues kinetically, and it will consistently continue until further notice. But the Trump administration is now moving its sights on what it sees as weaker links in this overall multipolar world. Remember, Donald Trump himself said that losing dollar dominance, losing U.S. hegemony, is worse than losing a world war. That is the Trump administration's, that is Donald Trump's mentality, and that is why countries like Venezuela, countries like Iran are on the chopping block. Now, will it succeed? In my estimation, it won't succeed. Even if the United States is successful in decapitating Iran's leadership, even if, and we know that Israel was pursuing the Ayatollah Khamenei, right? They were pursuing him and they failed to get him. But even President Pezeshkian was hit by an Israeli airstrike and became injured during that 12-day war. We know that the United States and Israel will pursue regime change. But even if they do succeed in taking out leaders, the Iranian people, the Iranian nation, even Venezuela for that fact, are very much united around sovereignty and independence. And actually, there could be a massive backfire effect on the United States, where you have weaker and weaker and weaker oppositions within these countries, unable to muster any political power, because in doing so, they are seen as supporting an aggressive foreign government conducting an illegal war against them. Actually, whenever I go to China, and I've heard this in other countries as well, for people who have traveled to Russia, for example, they say that many people thank the United States for its aggression because it has isolated forces within the country that have supported and loved the United States' way of life from the very beginning. This is definitely true in China. In fact, many in China call Trump Comrade Trump because all of his policies have only strengthened Chinese resolve, Chinese unity toward their own objectives and ends economically, politically, and militarily. So this could very well backfire. And it could also backfire into nuclear war, because while Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon and it says it doesn't want to pursue a nuclear weapon, it stands to measure that Israel's likely only ability and capacity, if the U.S. fails to achieve regime change in Iran, is the nuclear option, because Israel has nuclear weapons and is very open about using them if it needs to, the Samson option. Now, if that occurs, then you have a massive nuclear proliferation regionally. You have Pakistan in the region with nuclear weapons. You have, of course, the United States ready to use nuclear weapons. And of course, you have Russia and China, which are nuclear armed as well. This could very well trigger a World War III scenario. And that's the point to many of these strategists, many of these so-called military planners in the United States. They don't have any kind of objective in mind that many would assert is rational, to the degree of, well, if we take out this government, then now we can dominate the region wholly. No, it's not just about that. It is actually about moving toward not some kind of vision, but to the preservation of the current world order by any means necessary. And that means that destabilization, regardless of the consequences, serves the purpose of ensuring that the United States' empire remains dominant, at least for another day. That is how desperate they are. This, though, is really the waning hours of the U.S. empire, and it also is the waning hours and days and weeks of the Israeli regime, because as they become more desperate and use up the means of destruction that lead to more and more extreme possibilities worldwide, the more they run out of any legitimacy amongst the world's population. And the more that they run out of this legitimacy, the more that the world's people will want to build an alternative that is fair, just, prosperous, and more suitable to the development of the human race. That is where we are moving worldwide. That is where the multipolar world is going, seeking out alternatives that do not rely upon war, destruction, and the super exploitation of the vast majority around the planet. And now it is up to the United States and the collective West to get on board, because it is the governments here and there that are causing all of this destruction, that are allowing Israel to do what it is doing, and that is allowing all of this suppression, all of this repression, all of this stripping of freedoms, all of this economic immiseration we are seeing in the West to continue. It's all about empire, and it's all about keeping the corporations, the monopoly interests, the financiers as profitable as possible at the expense of the rest. A war in Iran would only explode this reality into the faces, especially of those in the collective West and the U.S., who are seeing their livelihoods and their existence become more and more precarious. With that said, everyone, I hope you liked this video. Please do hit the like button before you go. I hope you liked Eugene over here. He is sleeping very soundly as we talk about this emergent situation. So please do support the show, Patreon, Substack, and much more in the video description. And until next time, everyone, over and out.